Hello, in this video I want to critique Jordan Peterson's comparison of fascism and communism. Okay, let's start.
I wanted to do something very quickly, so I'm guessing that even though most people in the room have negative views of both men, they have a more intensely negative view of Hitler than of Stalin. I'm guessing almost everyone in the room has a far more negative visceral reaction to the swastika than to the hammer and sickle. Some of the protesters at your event at McMaster University stood behind a banner with a hammer and sickle. You've said that a hammer and sickle is no funnier than a swastika. That, quote, the reprehensible ideologies that are based in fundamental Marxism killed at least 100 million people in the 20th century, unquote. I've discussed this proposition with numerous people in recent months, and almost no one seems to buy it. No one disputes the body count under socialist regimes. Few dispute that Stalin was a vicious murderer, roughly on par with Hitler in moral terms. Most think that communism should not be tried again. In other words, they share your critique of the argument that previous communist experiments did not represent proper communism and that proper communism should be tried. Nevertheless, they still disagree with you that we should react as negatively to the hammer and sickle as we do to the swastika. Why? Because they say the two ideologies are not morally comparable. National Socialism is much worse morally than Marxism or Marxism-Leninism. So what do you say to this?
Well, I would say the first thing is that it's highly probable that you were talking to intellectuals.
Students.
Well, we'll call them budding intellectuals. It is a mystery, you know. It is a mystery.
Okay, I just want to start by saying it's really not a mystery why so many people believe that communism is less bad than fascism. And by the way, I don't think you necessarily have to be crazy if you believe that communism is worse. There are some arguments you can make. I don't believe that these arguments work in the long run if we analyze them more closely. But to say that it's a mystery, well, okay, I'll just tell you top three reasons that just appeared in my mind. First of all, not all communism is Stalinism. And I'm not even talking about Trotskyism. Because Trotsky, while he was less psychotic than Stalin, he was still authoritarian. He still did not have a problem with killing millions if that meant, if he saw it as necessary. And by the way, he was kind of trying to have a cake and eat it too. So he was critiquing Stalin for being too brutal and tyrannical towards the peasantry, but at the same time he was pro-collectivization. And Stalin even was inspired by Trotsky when it comes to collectivization of the land. So yeah, you can't at the same time be anti-violence and pro-collectivization. You're being contradictory. But okay, I'm not even talking about Trotskyism. I'm talking about democratic communism. Yes, democratic communism does exist. It is a movement that is also called Euro-communism because it was popular in Europe, and it was also quite popular in Japan and in Chile, where the communists even won a democratic election, and then the United States kind of helped Pinochet do a fascist coup against democratically elected communists. But what's my point? So, democratic communists actually believe that the only legitimate way for the communists to get to power is through democratic elections. And they believe that if the people don't like us, they'll experience 4 years of communism, will still respect the constitution while in power, and if the people don't like communism, our program of usually massive nationalization of companies and other communistic reforms, well, if the people don't like us, they'll elect somebody else. And in a broader scheme of things, I would be a liberal in a sense that I'm pro-democracy, pro-free speech, but even to me it's hard to argue against democratic communism. I mean, if the people elect them, yes, they should be in power, while on the other hand, democratic fascism does not exist. And I do believe that a movement like democratic fascism would be kind of contradictory, because fascism ultimately is about violating constitutional rights. But okay, let's even go with authoritarian communism, since that is what people usually mean when they say communism. And let's even stick with the Soviet Union. Well, okay, not all general secretaries were Stalin. Khrushchev, for example, was he still a dictator? Yes, but if you look at the number of people that he killed, and Peterson likes to count the dead, like, to him it appears the most relevant metric is how many people an ideology killed. To me, that's not necessarily the most important metric if we want to measure the impact of the ideology on the world. But okay, well, Khrushchev, he really did not kill more people than an average US president. I mean, did he kill innocent people in Hungary and Poland? Yes, but did Richard Nixon kill 150,000 Cambodian civilians with napalm? Yes, because he believed that the United States is going to win the civil war in Cambodia by just burning Cambodian civilians alive with napalm. One of the most painful ways to die, by the way, is to get killed by napalm. So, and Khrushchev, this also needs to be mentioned, was anti-colonial, and the Soviet Union played an important role in helping all anti-colonial efforts everywhere in the world. And I never hear Peterson actually mention this. Maybe he's not aware of it, but yes, one of the most important reasons for the fall of colonialism was the Soviet Union, and even a Maoist China that was much crazier and much more bloodthirsty than the Soviet Union. But yes, without Mao helping Algeria, Angola, Mozambique, all these anti-colonial efforts, Malaysia, the people of Indonesia, yes, I do think that colonialism would probably persist. By the way, that's not even my take. That's what Arnie Wested, for example, one of the most respectable historians of the Cold War, claims. But other than that, well, even if we just compare Stalin to Hitler, well, Stalin never attacked the United States. He never attacked like 70% of the surface of the earth, which is what Hitler did by attacking the British Empire, the French Empire, the Americans, the Soviets. And that is what makes Hitler uniquely evil. But okay, let us continue.
Because it is the case that there is something about the Nazi doctrine that seems to have a visceral impact that the Communist doctrine doesn't have. And I said when I opened my remarks tonight that it might be the issue of racial superiority. You know, it's something single that you can put your finger on. Whereas what's happening on the left that's horrifying is murky. It might even be multidimensional. Like maybe there isn't a single radical leftist idea that's murderous like the racial superiority doctrine. Maybe it's a combination of 3, or maybe it's some set of 4 out of 10. Who knows? So, and because of that, it doesn't seem as repugnant. And there was also a universalizing tendency among the communists that seemed to be less morally reprehensible than the ethno-nationalism of the Nazis. So, you know, you think, if you go back to 1914, it's complicated, but if you go back to, say, 1918, at the time of the Russian Revolution, it's not like the communists knew that their attempts to bring about the socialist utopia would be doomed to absolute murderous catastrophe, right? They were working in ignorance. Now, it's not that simple, because by that time Dostoevsky had already written The Devils, the Possessed, and he outlined very, very clearly what he thought would happen if people like that got the reins of power. And Nietzsche had done the same thing in his writing. So people knew that there was something toxic, let's say, and deadly about the doctrine, but it hadn't been played out on the world stage. But now, it's like, well, this is why I said what I said at the beginning. Fine, you know, if I don't know exactly how to make the moral distinction, but it's a distinction that has to be made. I think that people who apologize, who say something, like I think that it's virtually, I don't know if it's as reprehensible to say that a given ethnic group should be consigned to the fire and to say that wasn't real communism, but they're damn close. And when I hear someone say that wasn't real communism, I know what they mean. What they mean was, if I was the dictator in Stalin's shoes, I personally would have brought in the utopia. That's what that statement means. Or it means an ignorance of history that's so utterly appalling that, that any political statement made on behalf of that person whatsoever should immediately be followed by a paroxysm of extreme embarrassment.
I actually agree. Yeah, people that think Soviet communism was just bad because a psychopath like Stalin was in charge. If it was just Trotsky or Lenin, everything would be great. Well, yeah, I agree that that take is absurd. But what's also interesting about recognizing that problems that existed in the Soviet Union were much deeper, well, if we recognize it, I do think that the recognition of the horrible conditions that existed in the Soviet Union at the time could be used as even a defense of communism to an extent. Let me explain what I mean. What I mean by that. Well, the fact that the Russian people for centuries lived in the most authoritarian monarchy, most authoritarian empire of Europe, and that the emperor had a strong cult of personality. Well, it's not a coincidence then that in a country like that, communism merged with what previously existed. The imperial cult became the Stalinist cult of personality. Imperial expansionism became communist expansionism, now masked in a red cloak and presenting itself as liberation of the working classes of Eastern Europe. But at the same time, what's interesting, Stalin was also making an ultra-nationalist argument while making a communist argument. So he also said we are restoring the empire. For example, in conquering land from the Japanese empire, he said we are restoring the empire. He never even appealed to liberating the Japanese workers from oppression, but in Europe he made essentially a Trotskyist argument about liberating, for example, the working classes of the Baltic countries. But okay, and if we recognize that communism usually emerged in some of the most backwards, most barbaric, authoritarian, the darkest places on this earth, then it is not so surprising that many things went wrong. What is surprising, to me at least, if we focus on the example of the Soviet Union, is actually how progressive communism was in that particular time. For example, for the first time, women in the Soviet Union were allowed to go to school. That was extremely progressive for the time. The fact that the number of cities doubled in the Soviet Union, well, rarely in history did we see such rapid industrialization. Now, of course, that industrialization was done partially with slave labor, but still, I mean, we are talking about an impressive economic growth, and the fact that the minorities, like the Ukrainians, got their own republics. Well, that's also something that I don't see the Russian emperor ever doing, but the communists did that. So I do think that Peterson then also needs to acknowledge that given a deck of cards that the communists were dealt, and it was a very bad deck of cards, I do think that then Peterson even needs to recognize that they did some very progressive things, given the horrible position and the horrible history that kind of emerged in the new communist empire. My point is the Soviet Union could not escape from its own past. But okay, let us continue.
May I say one? I just want to be clear that these students were conceding that they don't agree, that they share your critique.
They don't share it enough.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I just wanted to make that clear. So they would more or less agree with what you just said, I think, about It's not okay to say those regimes weren't proper communism and that proper communism should be tried. They still dispute, though, that socialism as an ideology is on par with Nazism. So I just wanted to make that
Well,
clear.
we could say communism, let's say. We could say radical leftist ideology. As I said already, there are reasons for the left and the right wing, right? The right wing stands for hierarchy and the left wing stands for those who are displaced by hierarchy, right? An endless problem. But that doesn't mean, that still leaves it in the camp of the people speaking on behalf of egalitarianism to figure out just what the hell went wrong and to take some responsibility for it. You know, it's no joke. And we see these things play out continually. Still, look at what happened to Venezuela. Here's a fun story. Do you know that it is now illegal for physicians to list starvation as the cause of death for a Venezuelan child in a hospital? That's how they're dealing with the fact of starvation, right? You just make it illegal to have that diagnosed as your cause of death. That'll solve the problem. It's like, you know, we have a group of well-meaning socialists in Canada who just produced something called the LEAP Manifesto a couple of years ago, and it's a pretty radical document. They're trying to move our socialist party, the NDP, New Democratic Party, towards the acceptance of this LEAP Manifesto, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. But they were all radical promoters of the Venezuelan government before everything went like badly sideways. You know, I think the average Venezuelan now has lost 17 pounds, and that's not because they were put on a voluntary dieting program, right? It's not good. And so if you're tilting towards the left and you're temperamentally inclined that way, and half the population is, then you have an ethical problem on your hands, which is how do you segregate yourself from the radical policies that produced the catastrophes of the 20th century? And you can't just say, well, that's not my problem. It's like, well, okay, if it's not your problem now, it certainly might become your problem in the future. So, and I would say it's actually everybody's problem. In the aftermath of the 20th century, it's everybody's problem. So it's complicated. Like, there is a genuine desire. Like, I worked for a socialist party for quite a while when I was a kid.
Okay. What I want to say, I want to finish with actually a point of agreement. I do agree that leftists should be very precise if they're defending the Soviet Union about what exactly it is that they're defending. For example, I do condemn what Stalin did to the Kulaks, the rich peasants, and that was a program of extermination that was in a way very similar to what Hitler did to the Jews, but there were some crucial differences. The crucial difference, and by the way, this is not even my take, this is what Isaac Deutscher, Mark Tauger, Robert Service, the most respectable historians that wrote about this, would agree. Stalin never actually wanted to exterminate every single Kulak on the face of the earth, not even the earth, in his own country. Kulaks were actually split into three categories. I don't know, it sounds crazy, but the first category of Kulaks, they were the heads of the Kulak households, men. Then the Kulak families were number 2, and Kulaks number 3 were people helping Kulaks, sub-Kulaks as they were called. And the original plan was to kill somewhere around 100,000 Kulaks from the first category by sending them to gulags that had a very low survival rate. But unfortunately, the entire process became much crazier and much bloodier because of the huge droughts that happened in the Soviet Union, a lack of food, huge peasant rebellions, and in that chaotic period, somewhere around 3 million Kulaks ended up actually dying in the Soviet Union. But the difference is, Stalin never wanted to kill as many Kulaks as in the end he did. While Hitler, on the other hand, one of the last things that he said is that he takes pride in the fact that he exterminated the Jews of Europe. And for Stalin, we don't hear him make such statements. And why is that? Because in the Soviet Union, some of the worst genocides and programs of extermination that happened were more of a process that lost control and ended up being bloodier than it was originally imagined. While in the case of Hitler, you can't say that Holocaust is a process that lost control and ended up being bloodier than Hitler imagined, because Hitler explicitly had a goal of killing every single Jew. Well, not to mention that the entire definition of the Kulak was very arbitrary, and actually local authorities had a lot of power in proclaiming you a Kulak or not proclaiming you. And often we even had absurd situations in which poor peasants were proclaimed to be Kulaks because the local authorities disliked them, but rich peasants that perhaps were friends or just did not pose a threat to the regime were not proclaimed to be Kulaks. So the arbitrariness of the Kulak category, in my opinion, well, in a bizarre way, I would argue that it also makes the extermination of the Kulaks, in a philosophical sense at least, less bad than what Hitler did with the Jews, because there is something really disturbing in just killing you because of your blood, while with the Kulaks you were essentially killed because you were an enemy of the regime. But I do agree that the arbitrariness of the entire process actually makes it even crazier. But crazier does not equal more evil. But okay, that's actually all I wanted to say about this complex topic of comparing Hitler and Stalin. And if you're interested in this topic, I would highly recommend a book done by Overy, The Dictators, that deals precisely with this topic. It compares Hitler and Stalin. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you like this video.